the Russians they're getting after it, and that's causing me to have to go out and deal with them more than normal.
Yeah. So what does that mean?
Well, so they have been down for quite a while. They really didn't even come up from formation for a bit, and because of that, they're just now starting to really get into the breeding, and the males are starting to battle a little bit more than they should. I've had to pull several males out. They're nasty.
So do you? There's different subspecies of Russian tortoises. We could get into that, but do you have them separated by subspecies?
Yes.
Okay, and then
Um,
like all the males and the females of certain subspecies, are they together? And you're like, ah, yeah, hey boys, you're fighting a little too much.
yeah. So they're all separated into different subspecies enclosures.
Yeah.
But generally, they don't do too bad during, I guess, the off season, if you will. But as soon as one male really starts to breed, the rest of the males seem to pick up on it and get jealous. Yeah, they're box turtles. I don't know why my all my box turtles get along just fine. Males rarely, if ever, fight. But this time of year, the tortoises are all battling.
Wow. Podrek's join us. Welcome, Podrek. If anyone has any questions for Matthew, anything about Russian tortoises, please put them in the chat. We'd love to hear from you. Matthew lives in the Indianapolis area, about 40 degrees north latitude. And so you keep those Russian tortoises outside all year, right?
All year, yeah. They don't come inside unless they're injured, sick, or young. Um,
And in the wild, they're from high deserts, right? Really cold places.
yep. And they do in some areas get quite a bit of precipitation. They deal with flooding,
Okay.
but it's those little outcrops of good environment that they find themselves in. Um, that's another reason they studies that have been done on them in the wild, they've been surprised when they've seen so many in the same location. For a species that is known as a solo, they're not known as going around in groups. When they're found in the wild, they're actually occupying a lot of the same burrows, a lot of the same dens, a lot of the same cracks and rocks and stuff.
Like all together, like a colony almost.
So the pictures that I've seen is a lot. I mean, to me, it makes me think of pancake tortoises.
Okay.
They'll stack, right on top of each other in a
Wow,
suitable spot.
that's
Um,
cool.
their, microclimate, it must be pretty particular for them to all get down in the same one little spot. And I notice it here as well with mine. Um, you will have the loners that like to go out and be by themselves. But for the most part, they're all picking, one of three or four spots in their enclosure that either is shady, sunny, or has the water source. Which Russian tortoises do not drink well out of dishes. At least not to my to satisfy my desires. So one thing I have found that works really well with them is just laying the water hose right in their enclosure and letting it run.
Uh-huh.
They really pick up on that, and they'll go and they'll drink. I mean, it's not necessarily the most ideal, but after it starts to run for a little while, it's pretty clean water going through. So I don't really get worried about it.
Do they experience rain in their habitats
Oh
or
yeah,
no? Okay, so it does rain there.
yeah,
What
yep.
is it seasonal? Like when is the rainy
They'll get
season?
a monsoon, similar to I guess Arizona.
Okay.
They get their rainy season.
Yeah, yeah.
Same with Russian tortoises. They'll have a rainy season, a monsoon that comes in, but they're dealing with temperatures far beyond even what I experience here in Indianapolis.
Yeah, yeah.
They
Super
will
cold.
get there's plenty of times Paldador, which is in Kazakhstan, it got down to -29 this past winter. and there's several large populations that are there, and it stayed that for a week or more at a time. So it's not like it was just a real quick snap and then it got warm again. They stay cold. So
Our friend Michael is interested in the different subspecies. If they show any differences as far as estivation or their seasonal activity.
no. So the Horsefieldy, which is uh, towards the larger end of what they get, and the Rostanavi, which is towards the smaller end. Both of those come from much more deserty areas, and they will estivate a lot without as much requirement on them. If the temperatures even remotely get to feeling like they want to estivate, they'll just go down. Um, they're not bad if you need to wake them up. They don't really react in a negative way. And I will cool their enclosure off with either partial sunshades or a sprinkler. Um, the risk with some of those, both with the horse building and the Rustanavi, if you do have it too humid, they are slightly more prone to upper respiratory infections.
Okay.
That said, I mean, it's not a ton, but I mean, it's not something I worry about dramatically, but I do have them in the more sunny enclosure locations that, doesn't necessarily get hit with a sprinkler as much.
Okay. So just a little bit drier conditions
Yeah.
that they're used to, and if it gets cold, they duck for cover.
Yeah. Oh yeah. At Kazakhstanica, they'll actually come out in the rain, and they remind me of Hermans quite a bit.
Interesting.
And you'll find them in obviously Kazakhstan, um, but in the northern region of their um, native range. They get very cold. They have much more. I would say much more of a four season like we would in excuse me, northern Ohio or northern Indiana.
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
Interesting.
so I think that plays into kind of one of the reasons I have success here. Their climate is somewhat duplicated.
Can you find Borat there too? Uh, if you go to the right place, I'm sure.
Yeah.
I'm sure there are plenty. Um, Patrick, he asked about, or he's interested in the domed Russian tortoises. What
Okay.
do you think is that a specific subspecies or
Yeah.
maybe a group of subspecies?
Yeah. So the more dome, more round shell is going to be a Horsefieldy. One that's more trapezoidal, has more flaring to the marginal scutes. It's going to be a Kutsanovi. There's debate on whether Kazakhstanica always have that, but Kazakhstanica as well will have a little bit of the flare. But the Kazakhstanica, you'll notice, because they're much wider and longer and flat
Hmm.
versus a Horsefieldy. It's going to be really domed. There isn't a clear consensus on. I know some Herman's tortoises. The peak of the dome should be on the fourth or fifth or third or fourth, depending on whatever subspecies or locale. There really isn't that issue with Russian tortoise as far as identification, but you'll notice the more domed ones are going to be Horsefieldy. Rostanavi don't get too domed, but they are really round.
When you look
And
down,
you're right. When you're looking
they're like a
down, it's
bowl.
it's it's much more like a dinner plate,
Yeah.
where when you look at it in a profile, it doesn't have that quite dome as a rust or a Horsefieldy does.
Hmm.
I should have brought examples, but
Well, that's okay. Well, that gives us time, and I want to come and visit your
yeah,
tortoises, and maybe make a video on the different
yeah,
subspecies. Which subspecies do you have?
all five.
And uh, is one much more common than another?
It depends on when they were imported.
Yeah. Okay. But basically floating around there. If somebody buys a Russian tortoise, is it likely that they're going to get one or two? or is it equal chance that they would get any of the subspecies?
If you would have asked me 4 or 5 years ago,
Hmm.
I would have said they're going to get Rostanavi or Kunsanovi, because those were the main ones coming in. The issue now, and because the reason those were the most coming in, and that's coming from Uzbekistan, which exports a tremendous amount. They have
Hmm.
hit their quota every year that I can, that we've been able to track. But the problem we're having now, even though they're coming out of Uzbekistan, that's supposed to be only one or two locale or subspecies that are found in that country. They're exporting Horsefieldy, which aren't in that country. They're exporting Rostanov, or excuse me, Kazakhstanica, which are in that country. So they're obviously smuggling them in to Uzbekistan and then exporting them from there because they don't have enough to meet their quota anymore.
I am definitely seeing these Russian tortoise imports that come in, and they just look more variable than 10 years ago. 10
Yeah,
years ago they were pretty much pretty round, small, but now I'm seeing all kinds of different things.
yeah,
And what you're seeing, what I'm seeing when you see these things offered for sale, people will advertise like a giant female Russian tortoise, or they'll advertise like a black Russian tortoise.
yeah.
It is the dark shell is like almost really no light at all. Maybe just a little bit of light on each scoop. Is that dark shell? Does that indicate a subspecies or not?
Yeah, that's Kunsanovi.
Okay.
So I believe one of the pictures that you had posted is a hatchling Kunsanovi, and that they'll stay darker. There's both the Rustanavi and the Horsefieldy will have that sunburst ray on their hat on the scoots while they're growing. But both of them, by the time they reach adulthood, at least with the ones that I've raised up and every one that I've been able to verify age of from other people, they lose that. I mean, it just fades away. Horsefieldy can almost get like a golden Greek.
Yeah.
Rustanavi does as well. And it's, I don't know, it's kind of fun to see because the Rustanavi sometimes will look like a miniature version of the Horsefieldy, or at least some that I've got that I can look at them, a big female and then a little female, and they're different subspecies, but they look very similar because they're both kind of blonde. Um, yeah, it's interesting.
Oh, that's so cool. So Uzbekistan is the big importer or
Yeah,
exporter rather. So is
Kyrgyzstan as well, but they don't
that's the
have as
country really responsible for this international trade in the Russian tortoise? Without
yeah,
Uzbekistan, we probably wouldn't have this gigantic trade. Are they the primary people?
yeah. They're the driver that is
Okay.
behind it, at least for the past 2 decades.
Yeah.
Um, and the problem with Uzbekistan, the government official who did the survey, the population studies to figure out what their quota should be before they started exporting in '71. Um, he's also the nation's largest exporter of animals.
Oh, interesting.
No conflict of interest there.
Yeah. Now, there's some papers out there that I've read that talk about these farms. So at least some of them are being farmed, or are they just bringing them there to these places, and
No,
every single one of them is just being exported, and they're not hatching anywhere.
I can say with I every Russian tortoise that you find at a pet store, any of the big box stores, there could be some smaller ones that don't, but any Petco, any PetSmart, any Russian tortoise that you see there is going to be wild caught. And I would say 90% of the ones that you see online are wild caught. If it's not a hatchling, 99% it's going to be a wild caught. Lots of people try to claim that they're captive bred,
Yeah.
but it's
I mean, if it's a baby tortoise, chances are it's
yeah,
captive bred.
Yeah,
If it's bigger than 4 inches, chances are it's an import because you can't import anything smaller than 4 inches.
right. So if it's above 4 inches, you're looking at a 90 to 95% chance that it's going to be a wild caught.
Yeah.
The few, I mean, the people that raise Russians up to adulthood aren't getting rid of them like that. I mean, they're finding homes for them. They're putting them in breeding groups. They're not just giving them to a pet store as adults. So the price wouldn't justify it.
Right.
So
So you've looked into the CITES data, I know,
mhm.
the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species. That's a treaty between countries. Russian tortoises, I believe, are CITES Appendix
Two.
2, like all tortoises, or,
Yeah,
unless you've been elevated to 1. So that
right.
means the trade is regulated, countries set quotas and things like that. And are the animals that get exported, are they being listed as ranched on the CITES paperwork?
So they did. There was an operation actually in the Ukraine where they were the one of the largest importers of Russian tortoises in the world, but they were wild caught. Then they turned around and became one of the world's largest exporters of farm bred, farm raised captive bred. Um, it was just a Ponzi scheme. It was smoke and
I
mirrors. We're going to change the paperwork and make it seem we're going to get more value out of it, is what they were
So
doing.
they're essentially laundering Russian tortoises.
Yeah. There was supposedly another farm in El Salvador. Um, Everyone that I've spoken to that is heavily into Russians, there's absolutely no way their breeding ability would go down so much just with the heat. They have to have a brumation, a cold brumation,
Hmm.
to really produce viable offspring. So the El Salvador is not going to be producing any, farm bred.
How many? Obviously, tons of people, hundreds of thousands maybe, have had a pet Russian tortoise in the U.S. Um, and you're you spent lots of time learning about them. You've seen them in their native range. How many do you work with other people that are doing the same thing? Are you trying to set up groups of the different subspecies and collaborating? Is anybody interested in that?
There are actually a lot of people interested. Mark De Silva,
Yeah,
who
he's
is
on.
a TTBG member and is on.
Yep.
We were just
Mark.
talking yesterday or today, I don't remember, about making, going through his tortoises again. They're all out of brumation. They're doing the same thing. They're getting active, and he wants to make sure that he's got a pure subspecies. So we're going to go through, and I'm going to send him some tortoises to make sure his group's correct. And if that means he's got to send some to me to get rid of some, that's fine. I've got plenty of space and plenty of groups they can go with. So yeah, there's lots of people that are interested in it. I know Michael Fassman Wally's asked me about it, and a lot of it's been, I spoke last November, and then now we had winter in between, and people really weren't able to get their tortoises out of brumation and say, hey, what was this? What was this? And so I've been trying to respond to a lot of emails and messages about what subspecies people have.
Mm.
So
That's great. I mean, I think you gave a talk the last meeting, and that kind of whet our appetites. So many people have Russian tortoises or have had them that I think it's just opening this whole new world. Um,
yeah,
Sebastian says he loves Russians, but he's in Florida. Can people keep them in Florida, or is it just too warm there?
I've, people do, and
Yeah,
people do
as
breed them down
pets,
there.
can you captive breed them in Florida?
People do, but
Okay.
I know talking with them, their fertility rates aren't extremely high. Russian tortoises for a very, very long time were known as a hard tortoise to breed, and they weren't produced in any major numbers because I just don't think a lot of research has been put into what would strive for that. I honestly think a brumation is required, and on top of that, I think a brumation that's very cold and long in duration. If you look at the studies done on Russian tortoises in the wild, they spend less than 5% of their life actually up and moving. That's a very short period
That's
of time.
crazy.
5%.
5% of their life is above ground.
Not just above ground, moving.
Even moving. Okay.
I
So they
mean,
might be just sitting there.
they estivate all summer long. They brumate all winter long.
Yeah.
And then they're up in the spring and the fall to breed. And that's the fall breeding is really what counts. And that's why I really don't mind pulling tortoises males right now, because I'm not going to get any eggs off the breeding right now. That all comes in the fall. And the females need a cold brumation so that sperm stays fertile until spring, and she starts to ovulate and she gets the egg development. If without that, the sperm's going to die. It's the same reason most mammals have testicles in a sack. It has to be at a cooler temperature.
Yeah, regulation outside the body. Fifth
Yeah.
grade. We
Yep.
learned that. That's hilarious. Oh, we got a couple questions. So, well, Podrick says he would like to be involved with Horsefieldy. Kyle McLaughlin would like to put a pure
Yeah.
subspecies group
Kyle and I
together.
talked.
Awesome. Michael says, curious, can you tell the subspecies apart when you're dealing with deformed animals?
It's a good question. So, not only do I have the 5 subspecies separated in groups, I have a 6th group that are either captive bred that I didn't know the adults, and they're not. So they're a pectoral scoot and their femoral scoot. The size are going to also dictate which subspecies. So if they're not hitting all the key factors in what identifies as a subspecies, I'll put it into that group. And that's kind of my control group. And that also goes with really deformed, even wild caught ones that come in that I just can't identify because they came in at 4 inches and now they're 8 and they're all funky because they were kept wrong.
What about their behaviors with that kind of group of misfits? Do they show any interest? Can like, oh, that one is going after only the Horsefieldy. Does that happen?
It's actually very interesting with the male on male combat. This time of year, they're going to be very combative just because that they've got the hormones going. But throughout the rest of the year, they calm down and they get along just fine. There's no fighting constantly, as long as they're in the same subspecies groups. When you mix the subspecies, the males seem to not be able to communicate. They don't get it. They don't do the same things. So their fights just go on and on and on and on, to the point where I think they would absolutely kill each other if I left it to their own, decisions.
So if they're the same subspecies, they battle it out, figure it out pretty quickly who's dominant, and then they just move on.
But the same thing with the females. I don't see. I see the males that are in a different subspecies. They will, court, bob the head, bite the front legs until the female's receptive. And when they're in the same subspecies groups, the females, they seem to be receptive a lot sooner. When it's a different subspecies, the females seem to not want to do that. They just don't. They don't give the cues to the male, or maybe he doesn't. Maybe he's not picking up on them. I don't know. Maybe she's sending him in her language and he's not reading it because he'll just continue to try to court her and bite her, and he'll never try to mount her, even though she may stop.
Oh, that is
So
that is
it's frustrating.
Oh
yeah, I think there's definitely a language that each subspecies. But I noticed the same thing with box turtles. I had a 3-toe, a Triungus, climb part of the fence. Honestly, I didn't. It was a 6-foot fence this way, my enclosure fence this way. That's 12 or 14 inches, and it has a lip. It was somehow able to climb up and fell into the eastern box turtle enclosure. And they behave differently around each other. It's
wow.
I don't know if other people have seen that, and I don't know if there's any scientific proof or if it's even valid. If it's just my imagination.
Well,
I may have to
I, I think
metamorphosize it.
I think you're likely the only person probably in the world that can even make these observations.
No, there's plenty of other people out there with
But but
tons
but
of stuff.
but you're the only person that has like all five together in the same facility and has
Yeah,
has done that. Like I'm serious. I mean these are that kind of level. If you described that in a little bit more detail and maybe did some very specific experiments, that would be a great article for the Batager at least, and maybe some other articles. But man, turtles, I think we all know deep down that turtles have these incredible abilities and this incredible intelligence, and the science world is just starting to grasp that, right? So I can't
yeah.
wait to see what comes. And I'm hoping just that maybe inspires more people to work with and study the Russian tortoise. So all of us maybe have kept a Russian, but I guarantee you, everybody here has been asked maybe to take a Russian tortoise or
Oh yeah.
ask care recommendations for a Russian tortoise. So what what is your advice to us as tortoise keepers that get asked about Russian tortoises? Like, hey, my kid got this tortoise. How should I set it up? How should I take care of it? What do you tell those people, and what do you recommend us telling those folks? How to take care of their Russian tortoise? What's the most important things?
So I would definitely say substrate.
Okay.
They um, they don't necessarily need a hide. If you got plants, or even if you're doing an indoor enclosure and you have a lot of fake plants, as long as you have a deep enough substrate, they will just burrow down and they will barely cover the top of their shell, and that's how they like it. And they, if they don't have that, I find them stressing a whole lot more than if they would. Hold on a second. Hey,
Yep,
go
yep.
upstairs. I'm
I'll
getting
call you
feedback, bud.
guys. We have some special guests waiting in the wings. Just a few more minutes, guys.
All my triplets have been watching tonight on their phones,
Yay.
and they're going nuts. That's who's commenting on my
No,
name.
we just thought you were talking to yourself.
I can be at two places one
So
time.
substrate, deep
Yeah,
substrate.
substrate needs to be deep. I really, if you're gonna, I mean, they just don't do well indoors. That's that's one of my biggest things. If I'm going to tell somebody,
Yeah.
don't keep it
Okay.
indoors. I don't care
Okay.
where you live, where
Yeah.
you're at. Find that window of time that they can be. You can be in Minnesota. Dan, up in Minnesota, he could have Russian tortoises probably a lot longer than even he thinks. But find that window of time where they can be outside and put them outside. They need the sun. So
Okay.
yeah, I wouldn't keep them. Hey, hold on, go. They're itching to go.
Well, hey, we've got like we're basically there. So,
Yeah.
why don't we introduce them?
All right,
Um,
guys, come on down.
this is
Make sure they got a
Matthew's.
basking. Make sure they
Oh,
got a basking spot. If they're outside, obviously that takes care of it. Just make sure they've got good substrate they can dig in. Make sure you're feeding them tons of weeds. They do not do well on grocery store produce. I survive with my mulberry trees. I've got
mm,
a dozen mulberry trees. I pick leaves off of them every single day. Okay, leave your phones up there. Leave your phones up there. They're going to have a lot of feedback if we don't.
yeah, yeah. So,
Mulberry is the staple I use. Plantain,
okay,
dandelion. But another thing that if you have Russians and you're wanting to breed them, one thing that I've noticed and I've documented the past 3 years, and I think there may be something to it. Dandelion flowers.
oh
Early
yeah,
spring, when there's thousands of yellow flowers all over the lawn, if you set a tortoise out on that lawn, it's going to go from yellow flower to yellow flower to yellow flower, and it's
yeah,
going to ignore all of those greens, and it's
yeah.
just going to demolish the flowers. So that's what I do for most of the spring. I'll pay my kids to go out and pick dandelion flowers, put them in bags and bring them in, and then they'll have a mound of dandelion flowers. We've got several acres behind us. That's just a common area, and we use that to pick a lot of weeds out of. So these are my twins from the triplets. Grady and Nolan. Nolan wearing the Ronaldo jersey.
Suey is better Ronaldo or Messi.
What's your favorite tortoise, guys?
The pancake tortoise is the fastest one though.
Ah.
But I can beat it. Probably red ear slider. Yeah.
They like the red ear sliders.
Yeah. What do you like about them?
That we always have one here.
Ah, yeah.
Who's better
They're always showing up, you know.
Yeah.
They're one we get. I mean, I finally had to stop taking them in because we had too many.
I want to read the chat.
You can read the chat on your phone.
Yeah, the chat is PG.
I'm not on
it. Let's go back and kind of make sure I got all the questions.
Hey,
Mark
Kyle, I'll send you some. I'll send you some saplings. I get hundreds of them a year.
I want to see you say Christopher.
Mulberry, yeah. I've sent some to Kevin Minto, and
they're horribly weedy trees in the Midwest. The white mulberry. I kind of hate them actually. So, Sebastian says he uses cut up grass for mowing the lawn.
Yep.
Michael says there's species and Ninja Turtles are sliders. Although I've never seen a slider with I've seen it with red on its eyes, but not blue or orange or purple. Yeah. Podrick says his testudo love mulberry leaves. And, Patrick Lee is here. He said he would love to know what subspecies he has. So, Matthew, how about this? If people post their pictures to the Two Turtle Tom Facebook page, would you be able to kind of check out some of their photos and see what it might be? So that
and I can post. I've got a listing of what separates each subspecies. I can post that as well.
That would be awesome. I think you can post it to my page, and if you can't, just send them to me, and I'll put them on there. Because it's
just in a Word document.
So I don't know how. I don't know. I don't remember how that works. So
that's one thing I am working on doing. If I get time to do it, I want to get good, solid pictures on the same background of each subspecies from each angle, explaining what's what and why. That I think that would help a lot of people out. And I honestly, when I spoke in November, I didn't think it would be that well received. I mean, I've been the only one that really gave a crap about Russians for so long. I didn't think that anyone else would care. I just thought I was that one person. There are some people in Europe that I talk with that are big into it, but just in the U.S., there's very little interest. Russians are Russian to most people. But I think a lot of that's because they didn't know, and now that they do know, they're showing interest in wanting to know. This is Molly.
Hello. Oh, there's some turtles. I love them.
This one is pregnant. This video.
Oh, we have a lot of pregnant turtles in our house too. Oh, I love that one. We have that same species in our house, different color morph.
They have the same one.
Yeah, just slightly different color morph. But that very distinctive
that is just covered in
on the carapace that are bifacial.
It's covered
sequence
like that.
I've never seen
Never seen it in the wild. You didn't see those in Korea?
I've never seen it.
They've got these in Korea. I'm surprised you didn't see them. They're so,
I want to see who said Who said Messi? I'm looking at the chat.
Oh, did somebody say Messi? Did somebody answer you?
My name is Molly. I'm from Mrs. Hart's class.
Not anymore.
Not anymore.
Yesterday was their last day of first grade. They're officially second grade.
I love
And
it.
if
I
you
love
couldn't
it.
tell, they're
We're
second
just
graders.
growing in viewers. So, there was a little bit of a chat in the about paper mulberry. Um,
Hmm.
I don't even know that we can grow that one in the Midwest. I've heard of it, but I don't know if we can grow it here. White mulberry is a weed. If you
Yeah.
just anywhere in the Midwest or the East, if you pretty much just don't mow your grass, chances are a white mulberry is gonna pop up there. And I've never heard of a fruitless mulberry tree. And if there would be one, more than likely, it would just hybridize real quickly, and all of its uh, children would also have fruit. So
Yeah.
yeah, they're really messy. There's a
He's gonna
giant
put
one
her out.
in our neighbor's backyard, and it's all good.
Yeah.
I don't know why tortoises love mulberry
Saying
trees so much, but they sure do.
They, I don't give the fruit too often, but that is, when I have to prune some trees in the spring, because they grow so fast and so well, and that I'll strip a branch, and the next week I'll have new buds, new leaves coming up on that same branch. So I mean, it is literally the thing that keeps me alive.
Oh, there's a red ear slider. Oh my gosh.
That's the thing that keeps me afloat in the winter or in the summertime.
Mulberry.
Yeah, and that,
Yeah.
thanks to Kevin Minto, I'll be dehydrating a bunch this year and hopefully
nice.
have enough to feed my inside stuff.
Do you actively take in Russian tortoises?
I took 5 males in this week.
Okay. So you have a sanctuary as well, in addition to your breeding groups. And how do you look for homes for those animals?
Honestly, I don't worry about finding homes for Russians. When people reach out and they want a Russian,
Yeah.
I'll find one that is in a group that, I've always got extra. That's not an issue, especially males. But I always find it beneficial to have a lot of males. I mean, I know a lot of people, they want a 2.3 or a 2.10 group. Russians still wear themselves out on the same. I mean, they're not monogamous species at all. They'll wear themselves out, and then they'll just stop breeding. Yeah, you got to rotate new blood in, or they just will stop.
60 days for the eggs to hatch? How many days?
I've had it as low as 52 days.
Okay. Wow.
I've had it extend almost to 80 days.
Okay.
No, 90.
Okay.
It's 88. So, it depends on a lot of things with the incubation temperatures. I do incubate males. I know a lot of people wouldn't do that, but I find it very important to have multiple generations. I'm on F3 with 3 of the subspecies now.
Wow.
So F2's with the other. And you can't get there unless you're hatching males. So I find that important.
That's amazing. How long does it take for them to start reproducing?
So I won't even try a female for at least 4. Or at least I've done 4 years, but generally they're not reproducing until 5, sometimes 6. Males. I mean, there's some males that have shown themselves as yearlings, and they're ready. Not really, but they think they are. I've got a funny video of a captive bred adult male following a female, and then a smaller captive bred male trailing along behind that other male, thinking he's going to get in. And he's full of himself. I mean, he went right up to that bigger male and tried to. Didn't go well for him, but yeah, he was full of spunk. I still like that. I like that guy.
That's cool. What else should we know before we wrap this up?
Russian tortoises are a lot more than you think. They're a species that, in my opinion, we're not going to see them imported like we are now. And once that starts to happen, finding pure species is going to be very difficult for a lot of people. So I would highly recommend people start taking in. Most of us in the thread here, we all know people that have, Russian tortoises they want to surrender to somebody. Take them in.
And you can keep them outside. And
99% of us, even if you live in Florida, you can keep them outside. You may not have good success with breeding, but take them in, put them in an enclosure, leave them outside for the vast majority of the country, and feed them weeds out of your yard. It's really not hard.
I think she meant.
Well, Matthew, thank you very much. It was super fun. I learned a ton.
Thanks for letting the kids come on. They were.
They're super fun.
Can I tell you something, please?
Yes.
Ronaldo. What kind of turtles do you have?
I have a lot of hingeback tortoises.
Whoever said C7 Junior, thanks. Ronaldo. Let's go to Ronaldo Junior. Dad. What is? I didn't say someone said I like your something, Molly.
Slider Molly.
6 years 7.
All right.
Awesome. I love you, whoever said that.
Okay, guys. Have fun.
What is that?
No,
I love everybody actually in the world because it's not kind to be mean.
Bye, Matthew. Bye, everyone.
Right.
Thanks for joining us.
We'll see you guys.
Have a wonderful evening. Next week, live from Maine. We'll see you later.
For the turtles.
For the turtles. Absolutely.
Thank you so much. Someone just said Matthew. Someone said Matthew.
Bye-bye.